My name is John Letts. I'm the father of Jack Letts, who's been locked up in Syria and now Iraq for about 10 years. I'm a farmer, researcher, scientist, and my wife Sally and I, at the time, were also arrested supposedly for funding terrorism, which of course we never did. And we were put on trial at the Old Bailey back in 2018-19. And we've been working ever since to free him and to get some justice about what happened. We were, not very well off, middle class, I suppose, living in Oxford. I'd worked at the university, but I was running my own business. And so we had two sons. Jack was a really clever kid, very verbally very good. And he was very good at picking up accents and languages. And, played football, did everything like everyone else, coached the football team, all the normal things that you do, had an allotment, pretty normal. And when Jack was in his early teens, he developed OCD. But he did really well in school. I mean, he was top of his class in English, math, just very clever, very good in discussion and funny. He was a stand-up comedian. They studied him for a while for being kind of gifted in English. Every parent likes to say that about their child, but he was very good. And he had a lot of friends from every community. He wasn't wild. He didn't take drugs. He had a lot of friends. I mean, the truth is he was a good kid, never really did anything wrong. The OCD started to cause him problems at school, so he couldn't focus. And the teachers were like, Jack, can you pay attention to the class? He always had the answer, the teachers would say. But he was such the class clown or quite a character that one teacher said to me, when Jack was focused, the class was easy to teach. But when he wasn't, they didn't pay attention as much. And he was always cracking jokes and entertaining everyone because he was the class clown. And not just the class clown, he has quite a character. Anyway, so one day he came back and he said, look, I'm quite interested in Islam. I said, fantastic, I'm interested in Islam. And of course, his OCD, he was washing a lot. But he was washing too much. Some of the non-Muslims, they were a bit embarrassed by his twitches and stuff, so they tended to not visit so much. Anyway, we tried to manage it as best we could. And the one thing that made him feel really calm was when he was praying or, I suppose, washing. But when he decided, he said to me one day, I said, look, there's a lot of different interpretations of the Quran and different views out there. And you got to be really careful. And he said, no, I know that, Dad. That's why I'm going to teach myself Arabic, because I want to read the Quran in the original. And he was very aware, I think, politically, not as aware as I'd like him to have been. But so he said he's going to read all the different interpretations and come up with his own view. Fantastic. But he said, now that I'm a Muslim, what am I doing in Oxford? I have OCD. He initially wanted to go into medicine. That was his original plan. And he'd not had OCD. I think he might have made it. But because he said, I want to help. And that's how I was raised. And that's why I raised them. We had refugees in the house. Anyway, he couldn't focus on that. So he said, but the one thing he could focus on was Arabic language and Islamic studies. So he taught himself Arabic in 6 months online, which I think is pretty impressive. And he said, I need help. What can I do? And I said, well, that's a complicated area. You don't just want to go there. He said, well, I can translate. I can work in hospitals. I can work in schools. At least I have the language. So he said, I want to go study in Kuwait at an Islamic school. Okay, great. He called from Iraq. And I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm just learning Arabic. I'm working where I can. No, he was in Iraq helping people. He insisted. But I remember looking into all this and we said, ISIS. What's this ISIS? He said, I don't know anything about them, but I hear they're around. He said he was reading a book in his house. And suddenly there was an explosion and he was thrown across the room and he was almost killed. We think it was a drone attack. And we had a phone call from Reprieve who said, look, your son's on the drone list. Every British person is on the drone list. And he said he had no idea. He was just reading and he wasn't involved with anything. So they rushed him to hospital in Raqqa. So his wrist was really badly burned. He had lots of shrapnel. He was almost killed. And I don't know still the damage he's had. And he said to us that he started to get into problems because he was walking down the street or whatever. He started being hassled by these guys with big beards, ISIS. And Jack loves an argument and he knows the Quran. So they started telling him, well, how come you don't have a beard? That's not in the Quran. And they were getting really angry with him. And he kept bumping into them and having arguments. This is what he told us on the phone. He told us through messaging. And so they arrested him and put him on trial. And he told us that they had a Sharia court and an ISIS court, and they didn't think he spoke Arabic. He's an English kid, right? So they were going to throw the book at him and, I don't know, chop his head off or do something. And suddenly he defended himself in fluent Arabic, and he knew the Quran. He said, this isn't even a valid Sharia court. You haven't done this. So this is an invalid court. I don't recognize your court. So they arrested him another time. And on the third time, they put him on trial. And again, he defended himself on points of law, on points of religious law. They said, next time you're not going into house arrest, we're going to kill you. And he says, I don't have any money. I'm begging chips off of people in restaurants. I have nothing. Thank you for being my parents, but I'm not going to see you again. I pray that I see you again in an afterlife. It was really horrible messages. As a parent, it's just really sad. Not long after Jack had gone, he said to us, and this has been misinterpreted in the media, we were charged and found guilty of one offense. And that was sending £224 to a refugee family in Lebanon. Now, the media has twisted that and said we sent £220 to ISIS. Of course, that's not true. Sally sent £224 to a refugee family in Lebanon while I was asleep. So I've been convicted of funding terrorism. It was under the Terrorism Act, under a funding arrangement. Reasonable grounds to suspect that some of the money you sent could theoretically have been used for funding terrorism. The whole thing is twisted, right? So I never did that. But Sally had sent £224 of money that had been earmarked for Jack's education. It was in a bank account. And when Sally told Jack, while he was in Iraq, and said, or Syria, when Jack found out that there was a couple of £1,000 in a bank account for his education, Sally said, well, come back. And he said, there's money in a bank account? Oh, I can't have that. That's interest. That's wrong. So he said, give it away. He said, I don't want that money. But he said, it's not mine. I am not, if it's under my name, I can't have this. I'm a Muslim. I don't want it. Give it to people who need it. And interestingly, so he said, look, I have a friend in Lebanon. He has a big family. I met him in Turkey, I think. And the police eventually came round and said, 2 years later, when they arrest us and they think that the other charges won't stick, that's when they introduced this third charge of that money. We were kind of surprised because the police had already gone through that and said, that's fine. We're not doing anything about that. Just don't do it again. Sally controlled the money. It was in her bank account, and she made that decision. So we're panicking for a year and a half, 2 years. Jack's there. We don't hear much. And then we stupidly get involved with a group called Active Change Foundation. I think we were contacted by the ACF who said, look, we can help you. Remember, the police, I thought they were allies. They kept raiding us. They kept taking our computers and our phones. And we said, well, look, we're on the same side. Can you help us get him back, please? Put him in jail. If he's done something wrong, that's fine. I just want him to live. And they said, yes, we're on the same side, John. So again, we contact the police and say, look, can you help us get him out? So I go to the Canadian embassy and I say, can you help us? And they said, ISIS want to kill him. You can send him, because Jack sent a note saying, for £1,000, I can get out. I can pay a people smuggler, I can cross the lines, I'll give myself up to the Kurds, and I can come back. And then I can try to find my wife. A phone call saying, we've agreed that you can send him £1,000 to pay a people smuggler to get out. Wow, fantastic. The police are on our side. They are actually helping us. In a nutshell, send him £1,000, no problem. You have a green light. I can remember calling the lawyer and saying, look, we have permission. Can you help? Please, mom and dad, help. So your child is begging for you to save their life. And you know they're going to have their head chopped off or be hanged or something, right? It's really horrible. So Sally goes into Western Union and tries to send £1,000. That's charge number one. So what happens? It's blocked. So she comes back, she says, they wouldn't let us send it. So try again and try to send 500. So she tried to send 500 and that was blocked. That's charge two. This is a setup. We're going to get raided tomorrow again. Sure enough, 6 o'clock the next morning, January 2nd, they break through the door, they rush upstairs, and then they bring us, this is interesting, they bring us into a room with a financial cop, and they say, it's too bad that you've decided to fund terrorism, because we're now going to destroy you financially. And we have the piece of paper that says it. I still have it. And our lawyer said, I've heard them telling people that, but I've never seen the piece of paper. And it said, we're going to take over your business. We're taking over your bank accounts. You're never going to have a bank account again. And like 6 months later, we were on police bail. And then it was the first time that we appeared in front of a magistrate where she came out screaming and said, you're destroying society. I know exactly what you're going to do. And that's where they put us in jail. And we realized he had a lot of information from the police. So we were set up. So I said, we can't go ahead with this, Richard. This is completely slamming us. He said, well, I've spent all this time on it now, and I'm publishing. I said, you're framing Jack and us. And we told him the truth. Jack had never joined ISIS, he was against ISIS. What comes out in the article? Richard Kurbaj wrote, Jack called his parents from Syria, I think he said, and told them he joined ISIS and was going to be a fighter for ISIS. That's a total lie, Richard. The letting agency, because we were only renting, we don't own a house. They kicked us out of our flat eventually. These friends of mine are craft cheese makers. So they make this wonderful cheese. So as a joke, my friend said, look, if we can't pay their rent, look, they have no money. Where are they supposed to live? On the street? Yeah, that's just what they wanted. So he said, well, look, can I give them some cheese? And he meant it sarcastically, right? And so they had this little confab, the two cops, and they were talking. They said, how much cheese? And he said, 3 kilos, because we make 3 kilo rinds. No, because John and Sally will sell that to raise money to give it to ISIS. Remember, I'm involved at the time with the whiskey distillery. I make alcohol. I'm clearly not Muslim, right? But try to convince these guys of that, right? I said, that's really not my big issue. And he said, are you Muslim? I said, no, I'm not Muslim. He said, are you sure you're not a Muslim? I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure. And is that the truth? And I said, you think I'm lying? I said, I help run a distillery. This is vodka. Look. And he said, well, that doesn't prove anything because you could be crossing your fingers behind your back and you could do it in the name of Allah would know because you make a little deal with Allah. This is what he said to me. Because in 2017 or 16, I went to France. They were convinced that I was running a jihadi training and funding network into France. So we had to challenge things like what is reasonable grounds to suspect and all those issues. And the government probably wanted to delay us to go on trial as well. So it took a while for us to get to the Old Bailey. On the Old Bailey, the judge basically said at the very beginning, I'm not sending these parents to jail. This is wrong. They may have been naive or whatever he said, but he said they're clearly not terrorists and they shouldn't go to jail under the Terrorism Act. So a BBC journalist went in and supposedly interviewed Jack in this Kurdish prison. Now we know that he was interviewed in the torture room, which is a caravan. And masked guards bring Jack in. They put the light in his face. He's clearly petrified because he'd been in solitary. They put him in a little cage. He was tortured. He was really scared of electricity and various things he told us about. I remember standing in the house with Sally and there's a knock on the door. I open the door and this motorcycle courier with a big helmet and everything throws this package at me. I catch it and he drives off. And that was the letter from the government saying Jack's no longer British. That's how he was stripped of his citizenship. So I think that's what this all is. But I think the problem is, so that's now running over the last 10 years, trying to rebuild your life when your child is being tortured and there's nothing you can do about it. The media is against you. Everything is against you. I went through 22 different banks before I finally got a bank account that opened for me. So he was stuck in Syria. The SDF, we know, treated him really badly. So he was held incommunicado. We haven't had any contact with him in 8 years. We got a couple of Red Cross letters at one point. So about 3 months ago, I suppose, it started to come up that we heard rumors that they might move him to Iraq. We heard nothing. It was pretty clear that the Kurds maybe were losing control. But anyway, all I know is that within no time, they were rendered to Iraq. So I think at first they said they'd moved 10,000 of the men. Obviously, the Syrian armed forces are coming up to the Syrian area, and then they stop. And we were told, or we read, we don't get any information. We're constantly writing to the Canadian government. British government just says nothing to do with us, and we don't know where he is. I'm sure they do. They just don't deal with it. Because I think the underlying thing here is always the same thing. I know that there was a decision made at the very top of the British political establishment to use me and Sally, our family, and Jack Letts as an example, to scapegoat us, because they were terrified that all these young kids were going to Syria to join the jihad. And then the next prime minister with the bad hair confirmed it and said, nobody cares about Letts and Lane, and we've got the media on our side, so we're not going to do anything to help. That's what this was. It was a political campaign to use us. Now, I'm persecuted as if I'm Muslim. I'm considered someone running a jihadi network, a terrorist network into France. And if they're doing it to me, what are they doing to Muslims? You know, and they come for me. And we've been tortured, all of us, our family, for 12 years, 10 years at least, for political purposes. That's what this is all about. It's got nothing to do with Jack being a jihadi. So now he's sitting in Iraq. I don't know where. I live from day to day in a limbo where you wake up worrying about your son. I can't eat a meal without being upset that I'm enjoying my meal. I have a hot shower. I feel guilty. How can I live my life? How can we as parents live our, you love your child. You do everything for them. Anyway, Jack's innocent. We're innocent. I did nothing wrong. And I don't believe Jack did anything wrong. If there's any evidence, bring it forward, put him on trial. Let's get to some basic British values here. I'll stand by the decision. He's already done 10 years. I want to see him again. I'm getting old. And so is Jack. He spent 10 years, the prime of his life, being tortured. I'm surprised. I don't actually know he's still alive. It's the truth. There's TB, there's everything. He had no medical treatment. We've never given up campaigning for Jack, and we won't. And we need support for this. So we've gone to various organizations, human rights groups, and not that many have been actively involved. We need to work together, I think, to pressure the Canadians. If we can get the Canadians out, that maybe sets a precedent. We work with any organization who believes in justice and human rights and freedom, Muslim or not Muslim. It's a wider issue, like I say. The Canadians could change this overnight. For anybody listening who's listened to my story here, it's genuine. This is the truth. This is me. This is how I see it. If you could join me in any way to help with this campaign, it affects all of us. It's not just about Jack. And we're going to write to the Canadian authorities. I can't stop, but I would really appreciate your help to help set my son free, so that he can have a life and that we can have a life again, and we can actually have justice and freedom and all those values. I mean, I need your help. Please give us your help. And thank you so much for you also helping us with this campaign. I don't know what else to say, except I'm kind of overcome, but I'm grateful for any help that any of you can offer to help get my son free and end this nightmare for all of us.